Let's fire around the league because I do think this week on paper is just pretty fantastic. Now, sometimes you get great matchups. Remember Sunday Night Football, whatever it was, week 5, Cowboys, Niners, and the game sucks immediately. Bills, Miami Dolphins, same thing. So you never know. And sometimes random games turned out to be fantastic. But Chiefs, Dolphins in Germany, Bills, Bengals, and Cowboys, Eagles. It's just, it doesn't get much better. Let's start with the Chiefs and Dolphins. I do think there are some big nights and big days on tap for a couple coaches and a couple quarterbacks. And when you look at the Dolphins, and people, for whatever reason, and again, when I say people, it might be like 10 people, 5 on Twitter and 5 on Instagram, are always like, Middlekauff, you're always shitting on the Dolphins. Their offensive line was missing this guy and this guy. Even when healthy, your offensive line stinks. So, let's not act like you got Larry Allen, Trent Williams, and Lane Johnson when healthy. Your offensive line is a major, major liability. Your offensive play caller, who's also your head coach, has done a fantastic job really for 2 years of coaching around that and getting rid of the football quickly. But as a franchise, your team, when they play lesser opponents, looks excellent. You guys last week took over in the second half against the Patriots. But you played 2 real teams. You got your doors blown in one game against the Bills. And the Eagles thoroughly outclassed you, especially in the second half of that game. Now you're playing the Chiefs, coming off a loss. I think it's fair to say Andy and Mahomes are going to have the boys ready. Now, a huge part of this week, I always a little uncomfortable betting. I usually stay away from these games. One, I guess in Arizona, we're on half Pacific Standard Time, half Mountain Time. So the clocks roll back this upcoming week, but we stay forward. So this game kicks off for me at 7:30 a.m. A lot of times when it's random games, I'm not getting up super early to watch, the Falcons play the Panthers. Who cares? Or typically the Jags play the Texans. No one cares. But this game is awesome. And I plan on being up for kickoff, 7:30 a.m., which isn't quite 6:30. You guys have it nice on the East Coast. But I expect Andy and Mahomes to have the boys ready. Now, when it comes to the Dolphins, if I'm going to take you seriously, and I said this last time when you played the Eagles, I'm not going to pick you to win a playoff game. Whenever I see you against good teams, you lose. And honestly, it's not that close. So this is another opportunity, like the Eagles, like the Bills, play a team that's averaging 13, 14 wins a season, that's going to Super Bowls. Just look good. Hell, you don't even need to win the game. Just not be like, yeah, that was, they outclassed you. And that's happened twice now. Now, the other thing is Jalen Ramsey he's back now. So you got your star corner. And there's a reason. Listen, I like Jalen. Have a lot of respect for any high-level corners that like to tackle. Most great corners aren't into tackling. And that goes back to primetime. Now, he was so great, who cares? I wouldn't call Revis some big hitter. The knock on Sauce Gardner? Not really into hitting. Jalen Ramsey will lower his shoulder and play like Richard Sherman. A lot of respect for him as a player. There was a reason you got him for a 3rd-round pick. And I know he had a pick last week against Mac Jones. Little different animal this week against Patrick Mahomes. So I think this is a big moment for Mike McDaniel and Tua to be viewed as a real playoff contender. They've had 2 shots so far this season, and it hasn't gone well, really at all. So let's see in Germany, who knows how this crowd's going to be. I don't even know what to expect beside coming off one of their worst performances of the Andy Mahomes era, the first divisional road loss of Mahomes' career. I expect the Chiefs to be ready. So this is a big, big test for the Dolphins. I'll never forget sitting in my office last year, playoffs, week 2, which I would argue in theory in the playoffs, the second round of the playoffs, the divisional round, is the best matchups year in, year out. You're getting a bunch of teams that have Super Bowl ability playing each other. And we were robbed is the wrong word because of what happened to DeMar, but the game didn't happen. So there was a lot of hype coming into this game. The Bills had been really close. The Bengals had already gotten over the hump the previous year, beating the Chiefs and getting to the Super Bowl. The Bengals beat the shit out of the Bills. And I went back today and I looked at the box score because I remember watching it thinking this is crazy. They are getting shoved around. And a lot of Bills fans and a lot of people that they're an easy team to like, right? Who doesn't like rooting for Josh Allen? Who doesn't like watching that team when they're rolling? But one knock can be one physical run game sometimes is very hit or miss. And in that game, they got the ball ran down their throat. The Bengals ran for 172 yards. And it was just, there was like, it would be like a heavyweight fighting, a lightweight. It didn't even feel like the two teams belonged on the same field. It was pretty embarrassing by the Bills. When you think about their worst loss, like it was a gut punch, the loss they had against the Chiefs when the Chiefs went 50 yards in the two plays. But that was just like terrible defensive play calling. Two all-time great Hall of Famers doing freaky shit. Remember, like Kelsey and Tyreek were pointing at each other at the line. That sucked. I'm not trying to advocate that you should hold your head high after that loss. But to me, that loss was a lot different than last year. Now, if you want to say, hey, that snowstorm came, you had to go to Detroit, DeMar situation, there was a lot going on, no doubt about it. But they made you say uncle. And to me, this is a big game for two guys. One, like what I witnessed out of Joe Burrow last week was like, motherfuckers, I'm the best player in the league. Now, I would say Patrick Mahomes is his resume, but if Joe's going to play like that, this is both these two guys, right? If Mahomes is kind of entrenched based on his resume, based on the production as the best player and best quarterback in the NFL, on a given week, it's usually one of these two guys going 2-3. And I think you need Josh Allen to find a way, because let's face it, defensively, they have taken a lot of hits, right? They lose Milano, they lose Trey White, they lose Jones. They trade this week for Rasul Douglas. Saw a headline today when Gutekunst called him to say he was traded. He thought it was like a prank. He hung up on him. He didn't believe him. And then I guess the president, Mike Murphy, called him to thank him for all of his efforts. So listen, you were definitely getting a more than serviceable corner, but I guess he said after, like, him and Aaron Jones spent some time, they cried together. So sometimes you never know, like, it is a business. But sometimes if you don't think you're going to be traded, it's one thing if you're Chase Young or Montez Sweat, where it's kind of clear you've been on the block for a while. It's another thing where it kind of comes out of nowhere. So what you get out of this player, but I think there's a huge week for Sean McDermott, who, we said Leslie Frazier stepped away. Bullshit. Leslie Frazier was fired, right? Leslie Frazier was fired. It's like Bob Myers. I'm watching the Lakers-Clippers game yesterday. Bob Myers like, I need a break from basketball. I'm worn out. I'm tired. No, you're just tired of working for Joe Lacob. You don't need a break. I'm watching you call the Lakers-Clippers. You're still a basketball junkie. You didn't want to leave. You just couldn't do this anymore. Like, you just didn't want to be the GM of the Warriors. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Sean McDermott fired Leslie Frazier, and he took over. Well, what I saw, and maybe it was just coming off a bye against the Niners, they just gave their A game. But, like, if that's the version of the offense moving forward, like T. Higgins looked weird. He was banged up, looked fantastic last week. Joe Mixon looked like fucking Jerome Bettis last week. So this is a huge test for Sean McDermott. And to me, Josh Allen, like, part of being whoever you are in your era, like Peyton Manning, Roethlisberger, or when I was young, like the Favres, the Marinos, the Elways, sometimes your team just needs you to carry you. And that's what obviously the Bengals need with Joe Burrow. And that's what the Bills need with Josh Allen. So I can't wait to watch this game. I love watching these two quarterbacks. I think there's a ton of pressure on the Bills. Now, obviously, from a record standpoint, because they started slow, the Bengals can't really afford some else, right? So this is also a big game for them. I can't wait. And then the other game is Eagles-Cowboys. And I'll say this. I do respect when Dallas, when they get momentum, and they've done it 3 or 4 times this year against the Giants, they did it last week against the Rams. They beat the living piss out of you. They did it one other game where was the Jets, when they're scoring defensive touchdowns, when they're scoring special teams touchdowns, they look like a college team. They're all dancing in the end zone. You got no clue who's scoring. It's like dudes blocking punts, dudes returning safeties, the safety punt for 40. It looks awesome. And that's not usually how it looks when you play other good teams. And there was so much hype coming into that 49er game where it's like, listen, Dallas might not win the game, but if you just lose 28-24 and you just go 12 rounds, you're like, listen, a lot of respect for you. But they got destroyed. So now, same type deal. playing the Eagles, and you can be like, well, Dak's played the Eagles really well. Yeah, there is a tangible pressure right now on this team. I think if the Eagles lose this game, whatever. They've proven last year, blew out the Giants, knocked out Purdy, could have easily won the Super Bowl. They clearly look like the most talented team in the NFC. Now, the question with Jalen and the knee injury is definitely a valid concern, but it hasn't really hurt them this year so far. When's the last time Mike McCarthy had a win where you're like, hell yeah. Like, hell yeah. That's our coach. That's our guy. He kind of needs one of those. And this would be huge. I think there is, and Dak's played a lot better these last couple of weeks. I thought that Charger game for the first time this season, in a game that was tight, showed some life. I'll never forget the drive where he scrambled, threw it to Pollard, later the touchdown to Cooks. Like, when he's a playmaker, I think the Cowboys are pretty dangerous. Now, the Eagles, I think top to bottom, more and more talented, but we say this all the time. We were talking about it with the Patriots. Divisional games, I don't care if you're an undefeated team or a team that hasn't won. You are not intimidated by the other team's players. You are used to playing all those guys, right? Like Micah Parsons knows Malatu, the Australian left tackle, and Lane Johnson, the strengths and the weaknesses, right? No different than CeeDee Lamb knows their corners, vice versa too. So you are very comfortable playing the team. I think just a ton of pressures on the Cowboys. And this would be, like, I don't know if they get that much credit for a tight game, right? Because then the Eagles would have a multi-game lead. But all of a sudden you win this game and, you have the same amount of losses as Philly. You're going to start. I picked the Cowboys. I tried to be bold at the beginning of the season just to win this division. And then obviously after that Arizona game, I was like, God, is this team gritty enough? Like, there's a grit sometimes when you watch them. And sometimes it's as simple as, like, some of their bad losses, Dak just throws awful turnovers, right? Throws awful interceptions. To me, if Dak doesn't turn over the ball, my question for this team, like, are they gritty enough? Can they get into a game that's 17-17 going into the fourth quarter and win against a team that could easily win the Super Bowl? Because if they can, then I do think you got to, like, okay, I take this team seriously. Because if you just take some of their blowout wins, their ceiling, and I understand these teams are shitty, but the way in which they can just overwhelm you, they definitely have the talent, right? They have the explosion on offense. Defensively, if they can get a little lead, their pass rush is just so daunting. Their coordinator on defense is elite in Dan Quinn. So I think all the pressure's on the Cowboys, and I think McCarthy, even more than Dak. I mean, let's face it, Dak has had some big wins over the course of his career. Like, when's McCarthy truly won a big game as the Cowboys head coach? Definitely not in the playoffs, right? I'm sorry, I'm not counting a god-awful Tampa Bay team in the wild card round.